So, Stephen, can you help us understand the focus of this anti-Western protesting we're seeing going on? President Obama called President Morsi to congratulate him on that election, sent Defense Secretary Leon Panetta, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton to Egypt as a show of, sort of solidarity with the electoral process. We supported the Arab Spring as a positive development in democratizing that region and giving the people a voice in their own governance. So why now the anti-American sentiment we're seeing exploding?
Well, I think first and foremost, it begins with the president, I think, being disingenuous about what the nature of the threat is to our country. He had a very limited definition of the threat we face. It's only al-Qaeda, and al-Qaeda is sort of defined as limited and in limited places, and we're going to famously have his kill list, eliminate a few of these people, but what we're really facing is a broader ideology married with resources, married with opportunity. And when you have strong men fall, or dictatorships generally fall, the strongest remaining organized force has unusual power and influence. And that's what we're seeing. Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt was the strongest remaining. When the Soviet Union fell, it was basically the institution of the KGB married with petro money.
But it seems that we didn't earn any goodwill on the streets for supporting democratizing movements.
Well, in a way, what did the U.S. support during the Arab Spring? The president was famously slow. After a couple of these uprisings would come up, he'd say, well, yes, we support the yearning for freedom, but didn't really say, are we going to do something to materially help? He would call for leaders to go, but then sort of signal you're on your own to bring about that change. It was forced on him to intervene in Libya. We are more than a year and a half into the situation in Syria. No clear signal about what the U.S. will do.
Steve, to be fair, this problem is so much larger than President Obama, and he has not been the only president who has focused almost too narrowly on the problem of al-Qaeda. So let's go back to some of these terms that Buck put forward, specifically Salafism. I hear this term repeatedly when it comes now to Libya and Egypt. The lesson of the last couple of days, to me, seems to be how easily al-Qaeda can harness anything, a tiny movie in the U.S. produced by some buffoon, to ignite the emotions of a vast group of people. We'll call these Salafis. Is that an appropriate group to say who are looking at rioting and protesting? I don't know. Please tell me, who are we talking about and how large is this group?
Well, number one, we have a great difficulty in a lot of these areas in getting at how many people do we represent. Do these groups represent? You can say you don't really have to have millions of people to have a movement and have an impact. If they only have hundreds and they have great devastation that results in the death of a U.S. ambassador, it doesn't matter whether they represent a majority of the country. They've had a massive strategic impact. What we have is a very determined, organized, interrelated movement across a region, and is not likely to remain contained in the few spots that we've been following most closely in recent years. And so when I look at this, I see the marriage of mosque and state, or this political and ideological movement put together, as something that is determined at pushing the U.S. Westernism out and imposing religious
But the size
values.
of it does matter, I think, because, again, I think the problem is larger than al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda is a problem of limited groups of people who are full-on extremists embracing violence. But if you talk about what should President Obama do in Egypt, we have to answer the question of what comes after the bad guy. And if the answer to that is Salafism, well, then I don't know what we do in this region.
Right. Well, first, before we go in or before we open Pandora's box, we should have some sense of what the next moves would be. That doesn't appear to have been the case in many conflicts the U.S. has run into in recent decades. So if you want to be fair, there's equal opportunity of not seeing down the road in these situations. But we are not without means in shaping some of these events. There are people who are motivated by opportunity. Are we targeting economic aid to those who are more secularist or less violent Islamist in some of these places? We don't really seem to have any kind of a plan for engaging those who live with the consequences, empowering allies in the region who want to step forward themselves.
Steve, you're talking about getting ahead of this problem, what can be done with this problem. We showed one map, but I wanted to show another because it lays out what could be considered sort of Arab Spring 2.0. These are countries where there has been the beginning of unrest, very similar to what caused the toppling of regimes in the countries in yellow, places like Saudi Arabia. Syria obviously is in the midst of a conflict, and it will determine who ends up in power there. But Algeria, Morocco, they were sort of teetering on the edge, but there were some reforms made, and it looked like, at least for now, the old regimes have managed to hold on. As we see these protests going on in places, as we see people in Bahrain, for example, in Yemen, as these things are happening, do you think that this could spread beyond and we will see more of these regimes fall? And can that be prevented is the follow-on to it, of course.
It can be prevented in some ways, but I think if you look at the lessons of, say, the Egypt situation, did we have the option of keeping Mubarak in place? Odds, we'll never know, but odds are this was a circumstance whose time had run out. Sometimes we don't get to choose whether change is happening. It's presented to us, and we have bad options for whether we're going to engage and try to shape it. If you look at these other regimes, I don't think they feel confident that they are immune from these things rising up and forcing change upon them.